keep your boats, give me a four-wheel drive any day. 200 years ago, that Billy Bligh came here, and he landed right over there somewhere, maybe up there too. And he came here in a longboat because Fletcher Christian gave him no option. I reckon his man management wasn't real good. And he came from all the way over there at Tahiti, right across to the Australian coast and bumped it right here. When he arrived here, this island didn't have a name. But after 2 days, when he left, it was called Restoration Island. And the reason for that was that Bligh restored all his food resources and got his water supplies from this island.
Bligh reached the island halfway up the east coast of Cape York Peninsula after surviving for 4 weeks in an open longboat with 18 men. And I suppose they couldn't believe their luck when they hit this place. Native fruits, nuts, yams, as well as prolific bird life. An uninhabited island which turned out to be a supermarket. Things haven't changed much, even today. In fact, the black lip oysters were the very first things that Bligh and his men got stuck into.
These are those black lip oysters. They're pretty large and tough. But gee, they're worthwhile. There's just about a meal in every oyster. Look at this fella here. Bligh was pretty lucky that he landed here because the distribution of these oysters is pretty restricted. There you go. Whoop. Get another one. You can see that all the rocks around here have got these fellas on them. We've also got the old milky oysters over there, but these are the attractive ones because of their size. They're very high in iodine too. And, gee, this one. I've opened some over the years and found a little bit of a pearl shell in some of them. I don't think I'll have that luck today, but I was saying about that iodine. There's one there. Very high in iodine. And if you've got a bit of a foot rot, a bit of tinea, I guess the trick would be to put a whole bunch of these in your boots and walk around. Top stuff. There we go. That's him there. Just cutting away. Where is that?
It's hard to imagine what it would have been like for these men, so far away from anything familiar. But when you're hungry, I guess you'll have a go at anything.
When you have a look at Bligh's diary and have a bit of a read through it, you can botanically key out some of the species that he ate while he was staying here on Restoration. One of them was this fella here. That's the Wongai plum. And it really comes from way up in the Torres Strait. Up there, they've got a bit of a legend for it. They reckon once you eat it, you've always got to keep coming back. And of course, that's what happened to Billy Bligh. He got back to England, they dressed him up as a governor and sent him back out to New South Wales. So I guess they might be right up the top end there. A few years later, maybe 60, a bloke called Kennedy, over there on the mainland just over that way, was having a whole bunch of trouble trying to survive.
In the same area where Bligh was having a feast, Edmund Kennedy was facing starvation. In 1848, Kennedy set out to explore from Rockingham Bay to the top of Cape York, and the odds were against him right from the start. The expedition was weighed down with tons of equipment, and this was as far as they got. Kennedy Hill. going's hard enough here with just a pack on your back, but Kennedy had the works. He started off with 13 men, 27 horses, 3 carts, 100 sheep, and all their supplies. After months of struggle, 10 men finally made it to the top of this hill. Still hundreds of miles short of their destination. They were too weak and too scared of the Aboriginals to move into the bush and to look for food. And one by one, they died.
I look around here, up this way, that hill there, and another one over there, and those hills are all named after people who died in this area on Kennedy's expedition. In fact, there's a creek line over there called Glenny Creek, and that's named after the horse, Glenny. The horse starved to death as well.
This is how my work really started. I always wondered why Kennedy and his men perished, why they died with so much tucker around them. William Bligh managed okay because he landed right in the middle of a supermarket, over there, off the coast. Kennedy, on the other hand, was a couple of miles inland, and he never made any real attempt to bring his men down onto the coastline. Well, it seems the main reason for that was his fear of the Aboriginals, and they were the very people who could have helped him the most. This coastline of Cape York is as remote as ever. Even the Aboriginal people up here now live at a place called Lockhart River, a township with a general store. They don't live off the land, and their traditions are dying. Some of them used to live at the old Lockhart River Mission. It's a remote tropical paradise which has now fallen into decay. It was abandoned in the 60s when the Anglican Church handed over control to the Queensland government. But while the mission itself has died, the land around it is as rich as ever.
You want to have a look around now? Yeah, come on. No worries. Hey, we've got half a mango tree up here now. Which house did you live in, Harvey?
Right down another end there.
Another end there.
Oh, I live down here, but it's been pulled down now.
Pull down.
Yeah.
Righto.
Today I'm returning with some of the former residents, people with memories of living off the land here.
Yeah, you can use that head off mine if you want him.
Hobie was brought up here and spent a lot of his life at the mission. Some of them were married here in the church, and for all these older people, coming back here is just like revisiting their childhood.
Righto. Who's Lollywater?
Even the older people feel a bit like strangers here now. But it shouldn't take long for it to all fall back into place.
Just out here for the crayfish.
Yeah. Oh, crayfish now. Yeah.
More further.
We might have to go other side. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's tide, what the tide going out or coming in.
Oh, a little bit maybe. Might be going out still, eh?
Yeah.
Might get him later on this afternoon.
Yeah.
What do you reckon? Camp here, Minnie? Yeah, it'll be all right. What do you reckon, Ozzy? You all right too? Oh, well. Listen, you want some tucker tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bring some down. I got some in the car, but I've got to go and get him later on, eh?
Probably go down and fish it.
Hey, got a fish in you reckon? You reckon you catch one? Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. What colour this crab, Barbie?
On the sand. It's not.
Sand colour. Sand crab.
Yeah.
What are you going to use him for?
You saw.
Oh, there he is. There he is. What, use him for bait or what?
Yes, yes.
Fish bait. You bite you?
You try put your finger.
I'm not going to put my...
Oh, no, no. It's all right. Oh, no.
There we go. He does bite too. All this for a little sand crab. Crikey. There we go. The sand crab used for bait. Put him in the billy and save him for later on. Getting much bush tucker around here?
No, no, my way.
Not even that happy snail or that whelk? Few oysters. Don't do much, eh?
This part's a little bit behind, eh? In another corner.
Yeah.
Can't see oysters anymore.
Down here. Ah. Too far. Some down here. Got to watch him, old fella. His feet. Reckon it might be crocodile here? Yeah?
There's a completely different rhythm of life here, which an outsider like me just has to adapt to. Each time I come out to these places, it always takes me a few days to adjust. But once I do, it's great. Just slowing down like this gives me time to really observe, because things aren't always what they seem. There's plenty to find here in the mangroves. Things like mud crabs and whelks. Things that the untrained eye would pass by. And that goes for so many things along this entire coastline.
Every now and again, when you're walking around the bush country, you can find something that not only Aboriginal people used, but also white people. And this is one of them. Aboriginals had about 4 different uses for these matchbox beans. White fellas only came up with about 1, I think. Just break him open. Oh, they're a bit scungy, that one's had it. One of the main uses they had was to get these nuts, little brown ones, from outside of the pod here. And then they'd crack him open. Like that. And what they'd get is that white inside. And they'd mash that up, cook it and bake it over a long period of time, and then eat it. They also had some other uses from the same vine and the same pods. This is a bit of bark off the vine that we saw down there a minute ago. And if we fold that up, just a bit like this, round and round, and then give that a bit of a thump, watching the fingers, and then go and wash that in the water. Now this stuff here has got a chemical in it called saponin, and that saponin is related to soap, so that when you wash it in a bowl of water, you get a froth forming. And you can use it to stun fish. Oh, it's really lathering up well there. Stun fish and collect them and then eat them. Or you can wash it to scrub yourself down, just like you use soap. Whitefellas, of course, didn't twig to any of those uses. The only use they came up with was this fella here. And that's how it got its common name. They'd split one of the pods open, and then inside of that, they'd carry their matches, just like that. They'd join it together with a little hinge at the back here, and then put a little cord round it. And they'd carry that matchbox holder around their necks. Pretty neat. The string I've got here tying it all together, including the hinge at the back, is all, again, bush string made from this stuff here, the original bark. This tree here has got more common names than it can handle. I think it's got the Indian almond, the Pacific almond, the tropical almond and the sea almond. Doesn't matter. Its true name's Terminalia catappa. And he's very, very common along the east coast of Cape York. But you don't look up in the tree if you want to get the almonds off him. What you've got to do is look down on the ground, because that's where they fall and that's where you'll find them. When you're looking for these almonds around the forest floor, you've got to be pretty quick about it, because if you're not, and you're a bit slow, the rats come in and eat out the whole thing. And what you end up with is something like that, just a husky bit of rubbish. So I'll look around here, there's a couple of good ones, that's a good one. A couple more. That one's no good. That one's okay. We'll just go and find ourselves a rock and crack that open. Watch your fingers when you're cracking these things, because they, there we go. They can be a little bit tough to get open. Ah, there's the almond in there, that little fawny coloured looking thing, just there. I'll just get him out, quite long. They've got a taste on them, exactly the same as the one you get out of the shop. And the nutritional value on these, I think it's about 2,400 kilojoules, which rates at about 3 times that of beef steak from an energy point of view. It's really good food.
Of course, on the coastal fringe, the best place to find food is down by the water. Things like oysters and shellfish, and if you're lucky, there might even be the odd coconut lying around. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, the coconut trees weren't even here in Bligh and Kennedy's day.
These coconuts shouldn't really be opened this way, because these are the green ones. And you don't normally open a green coconut like I'm doing this, but I just did it because it'll give you some idea of the structure of the nut. That's the outside husk, and there's the inside nut, and that's the part we're after. Of course, coconuts weren't always to be found along the coastline here. We go back to old Bly's diary. He says over there in Restoration that he looked along the coastline, but he could find no nuts anywhere. And there's a good reason for that. What used to happen was when the coconuts were washed ashore, possibly from New Guinea or the Solomons or wherever they came from, the Aboriginals would come down the beach, grab hold of the nuts and eat them straight away, long before they ever germinated up here along the coastline. These coconuts you see here were in fact planted by the missionaries who established the old Lockhart River Mission. I'll just get into this nut a bit more because get rid of that rubbish, that stuff too. I think I might chop this with a machete because there's a point inside here to be made, and it's the juice. The juice in this nut is in fact quite sterile. And over in the Solomons today, they're using that juice in there for straight intravenous drip. See if I can cut this nut because they're fairly, ooh, there we go, fairly tight. Butchered that. There we go. There's all the milk in it now. Machete. You can see the milk out there now. Delightful stuff. I reckon you could probably ferment it too.
The obvious thing to eat here is the seafood. It's just fantastic what you can find here. There are literally hundreds of varieties of edible fish. Fish like trevally and red emperor and trout. And what I think's the best prize of all, crayfish.
This fella here is the painted cray, and you can tell why he's got that name. He's kicking a bit at times. All that bright blue colour on the back, tremendous. And this is the tail here. This has got all the meat in it. I'll just show you underneath. Oh, careful. There's the meat there. You can see it across the abdomen. They're very, very common around this part of the coastline, and you've got to dive for them, of course, to capture them. The problem is, of course, that when you capture them, they kick and squeal literally, because of these feelers here. And that squeal attracts the sharks. So I reckon I'll get out while I'm ahead and leave it at one.
The one thing I've learned over all the years that I've been doing this work is that you've got to roll with the country. You've got to be part of it. You've got to fit into it. Early exploration in Australia was one of almost a military campaign. The individuals took on the exploration with an aggression, an arrogance. You can see that by the equipment they took and their approach to going across the land. It was one of going out campaigning and conquering. There's no way you can conquer this country. You've got to fit in with it. Aboriginal people have taught me these lessons, lessons which have stood me in good stead. Lessons that I now appreciate and understand. And I can understand why they themselves operate the way they do.
Just drop him straight in, Ivy. Put him straight in like that. Like that way. Or other way. That way. That looks pretty good. We'll give him 5 or 6, 10 minutes maybe. Put him out and eat him, mate. Yeah. All right. We can get a little bit longer than that one. Okay. When Bligh was over here on Restoration Island, of course, he didn't realise that these blacklip oysters, which he laboured over on the rocks, and I did the other day as well, could be opened in a very, very easy manner. And that's simply by putting them on the hot coals of the fire, just like that. In a survival situation, which is what Bligh was in at the time, the expenditure of energy is extremely important. By putting on the hot coals like that, the heat makes the oyster open right up within a couple of minutes. Thereby, you are saving energy. And that, of course, is very important when you're trying to survive.
It's hard to imagine, just sitting here now, that that sort of thing could ever matter. But when you really are struggling to survive, that kind of knowledge could save your life.